With all four teams within half a game of each other in the crowded NFC West, a lot is at stake in Week 9 for the Seahawks and the Rams. Who's got the edge at Lumen Field? We're going to be breaking it all down in a new crossover Thursday edition here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12s and Rams fans. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Glad to be teaming up here for another crossover Thursday here with Travis Rodgers of Locked On Rams. We've got the first of two matchups between these two bitter rivals coming up on Sunday at Lumen Field. We're going to be taking a deep dive into everything to look forward to in this contest. We got keys to victory. We've got key storylines, you name it, all brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks here on Crossover Thursday. Travis, it's crazy going into this game because, I was actually thinking about this first matchup a few weeks ago, and there was the murmurs about Cooper Kupp getting traded. Maybe the Rams going to go into a fire sale. They started the year 1-4, and then they go into Minnesota Thursday Night Football, and they beat the Vikings of all teams, and they got a healthy Nakua and Cooper Kupp back. Just how much did that win change things for this football team?
It changed everything. It was like you had a season starting from scratch, really, since opening night, Sunday night in Week 1, when the Rams went to Detroit to take on the Lions. It's the first time that the Rams were whole in the better part of 2 months. The Rams that they were hoping to be have played 2 games. They played against Detroit when they lost all their guys, and they played last Thursday against the Vikings. They played the Lions really tough in that first game. And I think we've seen what the Lions have looked like since then. We know how good of a football team that is. And we've seen them beat up a Minnesota team that I think is pretty good. Now, the Rams record isn't very good, and they're in a weird spot, and they've dug themselves a hole because they were as banged up as they were. But this was a team that was this close to getting ready to move off of some very big names. Cooper Kupp probably at the top of that list. And they got very lucky and beat an awful Raiders team 2 weeks ago. And it was kind of like, all right, let's see what happens next. The Raiders are terrible. And then they pulled that game out against Minnesota. And I think it's really hard to know what you have with the Rams, but it may be way better than their record actually looks like.
Having Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back, obviously that's a huge game changer. But I guess what's really surprised me, I've been watching the Rams closely the last couple of weeks, in part because I did have some cursory interest about the potential of fire sale there, because they do have a number of veterans that could be coveted on the market if they decided to go that route and restock the draft cupboard with some picks to try to rebuild this team. But the first 5 games, this offensive line, obviously they've still got 2 starters out, but Matthew Stafford was just under constant siege. And then it has been night and day the last couple of weeks. What are you seeing on that front? Because the teams that the Rams have beaten, I mean, the Raiders, as bad as they are, you still have Max Crosby, and they've got some talent in that defensive line. And Minnesota's got some really good players on its defensive line. So the Rams go out in 4 combined quarterback hits given up the last 2 games. Is this a true change from what we saw the first 5 weeks, or has this been one of those situations where Matthew Stafford has been able to mask this offensive line more the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the offensive line, you finally were able to get, and I'll go back a couple of years ago, Corbin, when the Rams had the season after they won the Super Bowl, when they were 5-12, and it was a terrible season. But through the first 13 weeks of that season, they played 13 different combinations at offensive line. They never had the same 5 guys 2 weeks in a row through the first 13 weeks of the season. There's a little bit of that going on at the beginning of this year, where you'd lose a guy, then you lose another guy, then you'd lose the backup to that guy, and they were constantly cycling through these different rotations. For the last 3 weeks, they've had the same 5 guys. And whether those guys were the 5 guys that you thought you were going to play, probably not. There's some guys that are still down, Avila and Jackson among them, but at least it's been the same 5 guys. So I think the offensive line has gotten better, to be sure. even if it's not, your number one guys at each and every position. And then it's the second thing you said, which is Matthew Stafford's really, really good. And he's really, really experienced. But if there's no one to get the ball to, there's no one to get the ball to. And so he got his two weapons back, and as good as he is, the rest of those offensive weapons they had, or at least at the wide receiver position, were not carrying their water. Kyren Williams had done a pretty good job, but your quarterback is only as good at some point as to the weapons that he has to go to. So he finally got a couple of weapons back. The offensive line has gotten better just merely by being out there together week after week, and I think you're starting to see the results.
We've also seen quite a transformation the past few weeks from the defense as well. And I know there's a couple of different factors behind that, but the one that has jumped out to me, and everybody's going to be talking about the pass rush, the young defenders, and certainly that is a big thing. But talk to me about just how important getting Demarius Williams back was for this football team, because that is what I'm noticing on film is the secondary just looks 10 times better with him out there and his leadership that he's providing for that group.
Yeah, it's better for sure. And Williams has been the reason why. I still think that it's a work in progress. I still don't know if it's a strength of this football team, but it's better than it was. That, they went out in the offseason and signed Tre'Davious White to a contract, hoping that he would recover from the injury that he had, I should say, and maybe become the leader of that defense along with Darius Williams. And Williams, of course, gets hurt. He's unavailable through the first part of the season. And White just simply has not helped this team. It just hasn't worked. Sometimes it just doesn't work. I would be surprised if he were still a member of this team by this time next week. I think he'll probably be on a different team. The Rams gave him and his team permission to seek a trade somewhere else. So I don't think that he's going to be here for very long. The rest of it has been okay in the secondary, but Williams has certainly helped, at least gone from flat bad to okay. And then Jared Verse, their first round pick up front, has been phenomenal. He gets better week by week by week. And we were talking about it on Locked On Rams earlier this week. And my everydayers, I'm sure, know what I'm about to say, which is if the Rams could redo their draft, they wouldn't. They would take exactly the same guy. They got who they wanted in Jared Verse, and he's getting better week to week.
The other question that I've got on the defensive side of the ball, and this is really going full circle because Seattle now has Ernest Jones. And obviously the Rams moved him to the Titans in August, and the Titans traded him to the Seahawks. So he's going to be wearing the other uniform on Sunday. But that is still the one position that stands out to me. And the run defense, I haven't looked to see where they're at now, but I know going into last week, they were 30th out of 32 teams. And you're missing Aaron Donald, obviously, but the linebackers have been a huge part of that. Where do things stand now? Troy Reeder being on injured reserve. Omar Spates is now getting an opportunity to play. Where do things stand with that group in the middle of the Rams defense heading into this matchup?
Yeah, I think when you look at the Rams over the last several years, the one position that they really have not put a huge emphasis on, with one exception, which I'll mention in a second, is linebacker, and in middle linebacker in particular. It's just not something that they felt like they needed to prioritize in their defense, in large part, I think, because of what you mentioned, Aaron Donald. The one exception being the year they went and signed Bobby Wagner, and that lasted 1 year. And then they went back to kind of the ways that they were doing it before. I think they gambled on Ernest Jones. They were hoping they were going to be able to work something out. It didn't, and they made that trade to Tennessee right before the start of the season. It cost them. They've missed him a lot. I don't think that they've ever really landed on somebody that they're entirely comfortable with replacing them. You mentioned his name. Omar Spates is kind of the next man up. He's the next guy that's going to get an opportunity to try to grab that position. But like you mentioned, this is another area of concern, I think, for Rams fans on that side of the ball. And, the good news is you got your offense back together. And coming into the season, I think most Rams fans thought that this would be a team that was led by its offense. And, they were going to win games by, getting to 30 first. And they were scoring 15 points a game through the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. And the defense was asked to do maybe a little more than it's capable of doing. And I think that balance has kind of gone back to where we expected it to be at the start of the season.
When we come back, we're going to flip the script. We're going to talk some Seahawks storylines here from a Rams perspective. Travis is going to have his opportunity to just have some questions heading into this first rivalry matchup of the 2024 season. Don't go away. You're listening to Crossover Thursday. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like you, the fans who are first in the parking lot and are the last to leave. We see you. You know what else gave me a little bit of Seahawks fan fuel this week? The moment I realized there's a good chance DK Metcalf is going to be back in action to face off against the Rams and give the Seahawks passing attack a much-needed shot in the arm in Week 9. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for a big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help you keep fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy, available at 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teamed here with of Locked On Rams, and we've got a massive game coming up in the NFC West on Sunday. 3 teams atop the division at 4-4, and the Rams literally just behind them, now half a game. All 4 teams within half a game of each other. And Travis, you mentioned the Rams, they're surging now. This was a team that looked like they were going to be selling a week ago. And now here they are at 3-4, feeling pretty good about their chances to maybe win this division with their star receivers being back, the line playing better. Can't say that the same optimism is being shared in Seattle right now, where the Seahawks started 3-0 and they've lost 4 of their last 5, yet they're still tied for first place in this division. If they win on Sunday, there's a good chance that they could be in sole possession of first place, potentially in the division. This really does feel like a game that's got so much at stake, even though it's just Week 9. I wrote an article about it earlier. This does feel like it is entering must-win territory, really, for both these teams in this division, especially since they both have struggled against conference foes so far.
Yeah, Corbin, it's funny that you mentioned that first, because that was the first thing that I wanted to ask you. Is this was a Seattle team that felt like, at least for a minute, had a chance to maybe run away and hide in the NFC West. Like they got out to that quick start you mentioned, and then since then hasn't looked anything like that team. The Rams felt like they were dead in the water. It felt like it was going to be Seattle's division to lose, and then fast forward about a month and everybody's bunched together the way that they are, as you mentioned. Which team should I expect? Which team should Rams fans expect when they go up to Lumen Field on Sunday? Is it going to be that team that got off to that hot start, or the team that struggled the last few weeks?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, you just look at the last 2 weeks. I mean, I think the Atlanta Falcons are a really good football team, and Seattle went into Atlanta and dominated that game. Yeah. And then this past weekend against the Buffalo Bills, look, a couple of huge mistakes made in the first half derailed that game. But if you don't have Connor Williams airmailing a snap in the red zone over Geno Smith's head, and you don't have Connor Williams stepping on him the next time they have the ball in the red zone and tripping him up on 4th down, I mean, they could have scored touchdowns potentially in both those drives, and they're beating the Bills at halftime. I think that completely deflated them last week, and they just couldn't recover. In second half, it ended up being ugly. So as far as what team to expect here, again, your guess is as good as mine. When this team has played well, they've looked pretty good. They've got a lot of weapons, getting DK Metcalf back, which it's trending that direction, at least, that they're going to have him back in this game. That would be a huge addition for Seattle to get him back on offense. Defensively, they've got most of their key pieces that were banged up back. This is a team that's generally pretty healthy, but for whatever reason, they've just had issues with self-inflicted wounds. If they can avoid doing that on Sunday, then they've got a good chance to get the win in this game. But if they keep Plaxico Burressing themselves out there on the field, if they keep doing that the way they have the last 4 or 5 weeks, then the Rams could come in and just absolutely roll. I mean, I don't know if it'll be a 2017 blowout, but it could be of that magnitude because of the way the Seahawks have played. They've been so sloppy it feels like this team has not been able to play to their talent level because of those self-inflicted mistakes.
You know, you mentioned the sloppiness right there. In the first place my mind goes is this is the first time that the Rams are going to get to see a Seahawks team that isn't led by Pete Carroll in a very long time. That Pete Carroll has been a regular fixture in the NFC West, and obviously he's no longer there. What are the different? Is the sloppiness going back to the coaching? Does it go back to something other than that? And how different is this Seahawks team for the Rams fans that hasn't seen them to what we became pretty familiar with under Pete Carroll?
Crazy enough, it doesn't really feel like the coaching change has really changed anything. When you look at the numbers, they've actually given up more rushing yards per game so far this year than they did last year. And the issues they are having on offense, last season it was an inconsistent run game. This year, they have been so hit and miss. There's been a few games the run game has shown up, and there's been a few games like last week where they literally were just running into a brick wall, so they had to stop doing it. And it has been so inconsistent. And the discipline issues, that was one of the problems at the end of the Pete Carroll era, as it felt like the discipline had gotten away from Pete Carroll and his staff. It doesn't seem like Mike Macdonald, at least at this point, has been able to rein that in yet with the issues that they are having. It's just a team that is playing really undisciplined football, which for a long time in the Pete Carroll era, that was not the case. I mean, they had penalty issues, but they were not a team that hurt themselves that much. The last few years, that's really changed. And Mike Macdonald's got a lot of the same players, so that may be something that's going to take some time. But as far as differences on the field, I mean, they're still slinging the ball around the way that they did in Pete Carroll's time as the head coach. They're trying to run the ball, but it isn't working defensively. They're giving up explosive. The run defense has been atrocious for the most part. It doesn't feel like there's much different other than the look of the guy that's on the sideline.
Geno Smith has been blank so far this season.
He has. Yeah.
I'm asking you, fill in the blank. What has been what exactly?
I think that he's been the scapegoat. That is the word. That's the word that I would use. And I know there's a lot of Seahawks fans that do not agree with me on this sentiment, but that's okay. We're allowed to have disagreements here. I'm just looking at last week's game. On the drive that Connor Williams snapped the ball so high that I don't think Yao Ming would have caught it. That drive, Geno Smith was 9 for 9 for 94 yards. He was perfect. I mean, they were down inside their own 10-yard line. He just marched them right down the field. 5 straight passes at one point, went for first downs. He was dialed in. And then all that momentum just is gone because Connor Williams snapped the ball over his head. Fans are going to point at that, and I'm like, that's not the quarterback's fault.
No.
Like, that's not his fault. And then the next drive, it's not his fault that Connor Williams stepped on him. Like, I know there's going to be fans saying, well, he could have had staggered footwork or whatever. Like, yeah, but normally quarterbacks don't do that because that usually gives away what they're going to be doing if you look at the footwork for the quarterback. So it's not, neither one of those things were his fault. Now, did he throw some passes that could have been picked off? Did he have a bad screen that was intercepted? That was more misfortune than anything else, as far as I'm concerned. And Mike Macdonald agreed with that sentiment. But look, Geno Smith is the least of this team's problem. I mean, he's had horrible pass protection almost the entire season, and yet he's found a way to still lead the league in passing yards to this point.
Yeah.
They have no run game 95% of the time, and their defense, they can't get off the field. So Geno doesn't get an opportunity to get near as many possessions as what a lot of the other quarterbacks do, which makes the fact he's got that many passing yards that much more incredible. He's been far from perfect, but look, this team's got so many issues that if the pass protection was just a little better, if they just had a little bit of a run game and the defense could occasionally get a stop on run defense, I think Geno Smith would be 10 times better. I just think he is too much on his shoulders right now.
All right, last one for me, Corbin. We just kind of wanted to get your opinion on this because I'm not even quite sure what the answer to this is or what I even think the answer to this is. Maybe I'm leaning towards San Francisco a little bit with the impending return of Christian McCaffrey. Is there a best team in this division right now, you think?
Right now, your guess, I know I've said this a couple of times, but your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
I feel like Seattle could be that team. Like,
yeah.
If you saw the Seahawks team that now Atlanta's got some deficiencies. Their pass rush is the worst in the NFL. That played into Seattle's hands, but that's still a really good football team. Atlanta's beaten some really good teams this year. And I think Atlanta's going to be a team to watch out for come playoff time with the weapons that they've got. And Kirk Cousins, I've always thought is an underrated quarterback. But I feel like Seattle's got the pieces that if they don't hurt themselves, that they can be a division champion. Arizona has been a team since offseason that has scared me because it feels like there's a lot of pieces there if they put everything together. And there's been games they have, but they've been very up and down this year. The Rams with their injuries, they get their offensive line healthier to go with the receivers. They might very well be the favorite at this point because San Francisco isn't getting Brandon Ayuk back, and they're not getting Javon Hargrave back. They might be getting McCaffrey back soon, but they've got a lot of injuries, and they just don't have the depth that they've had in the past with the money that they've had to use to pay some of their players. So I feel like it's very wide open, and that any of these four teams could win it at this point, and it's really going to boil down to health and which team is able to really hit their stride in the last 8 or 9 games. That's really what it boils down to. But I am very fascinated to see how this plays out because even though I've said already this is must win, I mean, think about it. Whoever loses this game, you're still only at worst a game and a half out of first place.
Right.
It is still a very tight division. So from that standpoint, you could argue it's not must win. But I do think the tiebreakers playing into it, this is a game that has a lot more magnitude than I think a lot of fans are realizing. At least for Seattle, you don't want to fall to 0-2 in the division. You don't want to fall to 1-4 against conference foes. That is a really hard situation to crawl out of that hole that you have dug yourselves. But when we come back, we are going to look at some keys to victory. What do these two teams need to do to get an NFC West win at Lumen Field and some predictions against the spread? We'll get to that coming up next here on Crossover Thursday. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL action with FanDuel's #1 sportsbook because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Bet on everything from Ken Walker III getting a rushing touchdown against the Rams or Puka Nacua being the first player with a 30-plus yard reception, all at FanDuel.com. Join FanDuel.com today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This episode is also brought your way by Built. We've all been there, feeling like we're burning cash with those rent checks. It's frustrating, but here's the deal. Built Rewards has figured out a way to make rent more rewarding. Say goodbye to the money bonfire and hello to a renter's revolution with Built. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. You can use those points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or a hotel with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them towards a future rent payment. They're designed to meet whatever your lifestyle is. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you join the Built.com/LockedOnNFL. That's JOINBILT.com/LockedOnNFL. And make sure to use the URL so they know we sent you. Join Built.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teaming up with Travis Rodgers from Locked On Rams. And a special thanks to all the 12s and Rams fans that are listening. And thanks for making Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Rams your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Fast forwarding to Sunday, let's talk some keys to victory for these two teams. Travis, going to start with the Rams, who are coming in hot. They've won their last 2 games. They get that huge win in primetime at Minnesota against the Vikings. When you look at this first matchup against the Seahawks, what are a few things that jump out to you think the Rams absolutely have got to do to go into Lumen Field and get the victory?
Well, I think it's something that you mentioned a couple of times, Corbin, and that's don't let the Seahawks find their run game. This is something that the Rams have struggled with for most of the season. Most teams have been able to run it on them. And I think one of the ways that they'll be able to do that, if it's going to work out, is they need to play with a lead. You know, when the Rams can play with a lead and other teams have to chase, their inability to stop the run becomes a lot less problematic because teams are trying to pass to get back into the game against them. When the Rams defense knows that their opposition is in a passing situation, they become pretty good. They have some guys that can get to the quarterback. I mentioned Jared Verse earlier. He's been terrific. Byron Young had a pretty good game against the Vikings last week. You're starting to see Kobe Turner, Jared Verse kind of bring their games around. So I think it kind of starts right there. I think the Rams offense will be good. You know, I kind of always come back to this. Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford is a very good combination to start with, as long as there's people to throw the ball to. I think the offense will be fine. The question is whether or not they can stop anybody. They did a really good job against a Minnesota team that had been playing pretty well for most of the season. So I think it starts right there. If they can control the running game defensively, I think they're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, for the Seahawks, they got to be able to run the damn football. I mean, it's been one game after another where they have not been able to find it, or it's waited till the second half that they can get their run game going. If there's a game that they can get their rushing attack going, it's got to be this one. I mean, the Rams have got extensive games this year where they have not been able to stop the run. And these two teams have been very similar in that regard on defense. And I'm looking at it also from a play action standpoint, because you mentioned this earlier. Getting Darius Williams back has really helped in that secondary, but you don't have a Jalen Ramsey anymore in that secondary. There's injuries at the safety position. There's been defections in free agency. This still feels like a group, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at least before the last couple of weeks, they were giving up a lot of big plays in the passing game downfield. Feels like plays can be there. And if you have DK Metcalf back, you have Jack Smith and Jigba, you have Tyler Lockett against that secondary. Darn it, if you can just run the ball just good enough that the play action is believable and he can run some play action under center and take those shots, that's going to be a big deal. As far as the defensive side of things, look, I'm calling out a couple guys right now. Leonard Williams, Jared Reed, and Byron Murphy II. By most accounts, this has been a solid group this year. Their interior defensive line has been a strength for this football team. It was not last week against the Buffalo Bills. All three of those players were non-existent. They were completely silenced by Buffalo's offensive line. You're playing a Rams offense that's missing their starting center and starting right guard. And I know they're playing better the last couple of weeks, but you've got some high-priced guys. You've got a player in Byron Murphy that was picked in the top 16 selections that you expected to be a game changer. Those guys need to play to that level when you're playing backups. They need to take the game over, and they need to get pressure on Matthew Stafford, speed up his clock, because he has shown throughout his career and early this year especially, I know he was missing receivers, but he will take some chances when pressure's bearing down, and he will throw it into traffic. The Seahawks have got to find a way to use pressure to create a turnover or two in this game. And if they do get those turnovers, they got to score off of them. So this has just been the issue with the Seahawks team. When they do get a big play, they can't capitalize on it. Yeah. You have to be able to do that against the Rams. You got to take advantage of the mismatch that you've got in the interior of the defensive line against that injury-battered offensive line. If they can't do that in this game, then I don't know if they can get this defense fixed moving into the second half of the season.
Yeah, the Rams have had a little bit of luck, not against Minnesota, but in the previous 2 weeks, the Rams had not scored on defense in over a year, and they scored on defense in consecutive games against what we saw against the Raiders and the Packers the week before that. And then last week, they didn't take it away necessarily, but they do feel like they're starting to come together a little bit in what was, I think, through the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, this was, quite frankly, there's no other way to put it, a bad defense. And now it's a below average defense. And below average occasionally is okay in the NFL, as long as the other side is carrying their weight. And I think this is a huge game for the Rams, because they win 3 in a row. That felt like mission impossible just a month ago. May not win 3 games the rest of the year is what it felt like. And to be able to win 3 in a row, you've mentioned several times, to get back to 500 for the Rams, to get out of that last place spot that they've been in for a long time. And depending on how the rest of the week goes in the division, the Rams could be near the top of the division. They got a Miami team coming in after that on Monday Night Football, a chance to maybe take advantage of that. The Patriots after that. So they could get a little bit of momentum going here, but this is the one, because you lose this one, you're back at 3-5. You're still a couple of weeks away from 500 at best. This is a huge game for the Rams.
Going into this game, the Seahawks are 1.5-point favorites. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm stunned with the way that Seattle's played at home. I mean, they have been abysmal at home. Honestly, I think they'd be better just saying, can we play both games down at SoFi Stadium right now? Because they have been that bad at home. Yeah. Their home field advantage is gone. They have had an invasion of road fans. If the Rams fans do that in this game, then we know we've got a real issue.
I think you're okay.
In the Pacific Northwest. But 1.5-point favorites, I'm actually really surprised with the way that they played last week, that's where things stand. And yet, from a spread perspective, I actually think there's a decent chance they can cover that. I actually think that Seattle matches up better with this Rams team than what they did with the Buffalo Bills last week from a personnel standpoint. Now, does that mean that I necessarily think they're going to win? I'm not going to say right now whether I think they're going to win or not, but I could see them cover. I could also see this game getting away from them if they are not able to stop the run and they're not able to pressure Matthew Stafford. Then maybe it is like that 2017 game and things end up just going into blowout city the way they did last week against the Bills. So this team is not one that I would recommend putting any bets on because you just don't know what you're going to get.
You beat me to it. This is a run for the hills. I'm no help here because the Rams have played close games all season long. They've had one game that was kind of lopsided. They were on the wrong end of that Arizona game early in the year where they didn't look good at all. But every time I'm feeling pretty good about the Rams, they show up and they give you something less than their best. And right when you're just about to say, okay, forget these guys, they're never going to figure it out, they show up and they do something like they did against Minnesota. So still trying to figure out what they are with their new guys back. But that 1.5 feels about right because that feels where it just about every other Rams game lands, and they're due to play a very close game, I think.
Looking forward to seeing a close game because, look, Seattle's had some big losses this year. It has not been fun for Seahawks fans, but they're hoping that they can get a little bit of momentum going here at home. And for goodness sakes, can they beat Matthew Stafford for once? Because it has not happened since Matthew Stafford came to the Rams. He's 4-0. They're going to be looking to try to snap that this weekend, but should be a good game between two teams that are trending in opposite directions. And Seahawks looking to get things right. The Rams looking to stay hot. And, of course, a chance for NFC West supremacy in a very tight division. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Travis at Travis Rodgers. And make sure to listen to Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Rams for our Friday episodes coming up tomorrow as we look deeper at this upcoming matchup. And at least on our show, we're going to have some game planning and our final predictions. Make sure that you're listening in. Thanks for tuning into this crossover Thursday, Seahawks fans and Rams fans. Go Hawks, go Rams.